I thought I understood my family's priorities until the day I watched my father sign a $40,000 loan for my sister's business venture, while I was literally holding rejection letters from financial aid offices, unable to afford basic textbooks for my final semester. What I discovered next about their hidden financial arrangements would shatter everything I believed about fairness, family loyalty, and my place in their world. My name is Sarah. I'm 29 years old, and I'm a registered nurse working in pediatric oncology. But 5 years ago, I was a struggling college student trying to complete my nursing degree while working 3 part-time jobs just to survive. This is the story of how my family's financial favoritism nearly destroyed my dreams, and how uncovering their elaborate deception ultimately set me free. Growing up, I was always the responsible one. While my older sister Emma floated through life with grand ideas and bigger dreams, I was the one who did my homework without being asked, helped with household chores, and never caused any drama. My parents seemed to appreciate my reliability, but I started noticing patterns that made me uncomfortable. When Emma crashed her car at 16, Dad immediately bought her a newer, better one. When I turned 16, I got a lecture about responsibility and was told I could work to save up for my own transportation. The differences became more pronounced as we got older. Emma changed her major 4 times during college, each switch requiring additional semesters that my parents funded without question. When she decided to study abroad in Italy for a year, they not only paid the program fees, but also sent her monthly spending money. Meanwhile, I had chosen nursing specifically because it was practical and had good job prospects, carefully researching scholarships and financial aid options to minimize the burden on my family. I remember the exact moment I realized something was fundamentally wrong with how my parents viewed their 2 daughters. It was during my junior year of nursing school, and I was struggling to balance my course load with my work schedule at a local restaurant. My grades were solid, but I was exhausted and stressed about making ends meet. I had applied for several scholarships but hadn't heard back yet, and my financial aid only covered tuition, not books or living expenses. That Tuesday evening, I came home to find Emma excitedly showing our parents paperwork for her latest venture. She had developed a business plan for a boutique clothing store and needed startup capital. I watched from the kitchen doorway as my father reviewed her proposal, nodding approvingly at her enthusiasm. By the end of the evening, he had agreed to co-sign a $40,000 small business loan to help her get started. The timing couldn't have been worse for me. The next morning, I received notification that I owed $800 for textbooks that were required for my advanced pathophysiology course. This wasn't optional reading. These were the specific editions our professors required for clinical rotations. I had already exhausted my options with used bookstores and online rentals. I needed help, and I needed it quickly. I approached my father that weekend with a carefully prepared presentation. I had calculated exactly how much I needed, researched the return on investment for nursing degrees, and even brought documentation of my academic performance. I wasn't asking for a gift. I was asking for a loan that I would pay back with interest once I graduated and started working. The amount was $1,200 to cover textbooks for my remaining 3 semesters. His response was swift and definitive. He explained that money was tight, that they had already stretched their budget to help Emma, and that I needed to find other solutions. He suggested I talk to my professors about alternative textbook options, apply for more scholarships, or consider taking fewer classes per semester to reduce my expenses. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. I left that meeting feeling completely deflated. Here was my father, who had just committed to a $40,000 loan for Emma's uncertain business venture, telling me that $1,200 for required educational materials was beyond their means. The mathematical impossibility of his reasoning wasn't lost on me, but I was too shocked to argue effectively. What followed was a series of increasingly desperate attempts to find alternative funding. I picked up extra shifts at the restaurant, applied for every small scholarship I could find, and even considered donating plasma to make extra money. My grades began to suffer as I spent more time working and less time studying. I started borrowing textbooks from classmates, photocopying chapters illegally, and relying on older editions that didn't always align with current coursework. The stress was overwhelming. I remember sitting in my car after a particularly difficult clinical rotation, crying because I felt like I was failing despite working harder than ever. My classmates seemed to have everything they needed while I was constantly scrambling to keep up. I started avoiding family gatherings because watching Emma's business plans unfold with full parental support was too painful. During this period, I began noticing other discrepancies in how my parents treated their daughters. Emma's apartment rent was subsidized by monthly checks from Dad, while I was expected to manage my housing costs independently. When Emma's business struggled during its first year, my parents covered her personal expenses so she could focus on building her customer base. When I asked for help with my car insurance premium, I was told that financial responsibility was an important life skill. The breaking point came during my final semester. I had managed to secure a prestigious internship at Children's Hospital, an opportunity that would significantly boost my career prospects. The position was unpaid, as most clinical internships are, but it required a significant time commitment that would prevent me from working my usual restaurant shifts. I calculated that I would need $2,000 to cover my expenses during the 3-month internship period. I presented this opportunity to my parents with detailed documentation of the program's benefits, letters of recommendation from my professors, and a clear repayment plan. The internship director had already indicated that successful completion would likely lead to a full-time job offer upon graduation. This wasn't just about immediate financial need, it was about launching my career. My father's response was more dismissive than ever. He questioned whether the internship was really necessary, suggested I find a paid position instead, and implied that I was being unrealistic about my career expectations. He reminded me that Emma's business was still getting established and that they couldn't afford to support both of us simultaneously. The conversation ended with him telling me that if I couldn't afford the internship, perhaps I should consider whether nursing was the right career path for me. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I decided to take out a private student loan to cover the internship expenses, despite the high interest rates and unfavorable terms. I was determined to succeed regardless of my family's support, even if it meant graduating with more debt than my classmates. The internship was transformative. I excelled in the pediatric oncology unit, developing skills and relationships that would define my career. The attending physicians were impressed with my dedication and clinical judgment, and I was indeed offered a full-time position upon graduation. More importantly, I discovered that I had talents and capabilities that extended far beyond what my family had ever acknowledged. During my final month of the internship, something unexpected happened. I was selected to present a case study at the Regional Pediatric Nursing Conference, a significant honor for a student. The presentation went exceptionally well, and I was approached by several hospital administrators who were interested in my research. Within weeks, I had job offers from 3 different hospitals, each offering starting salaries that exceeded my parents' combined annual income. The recognition continued after graduation. I was accepted into a competitive critical care certification program, received a merit-based scholarship for continuing education, and was invited to join a research team studying innovative pain management techniques for pediatric cancer patients. My career trajectory was exceeding everyone's expectations, including my own. Meanwhile, Emma's boutique business was struggling. Despite the initial $40,000 investment and continued financial support from our parents, she was having difficulty maintaining consistent revenue. The retail environment was more challenging than she had anticipated, and her business plan had underestimated several key expenses. By the time I graduated nursing school, she was already discussing the possibility of closing the store. The first crack in my family's facade came during my graduation ceremony. My parents attended, along with extended family members who were genuinely proud of my achievements. During the reception, my aunt mentioned how impressed she was that I had managed to complete such a demanding program while working multiple jobs. She made a comment about how different my experience had been from Emma's college years, when everything was paid for and she could focus entirely on her studies. My mother's response was telling. She quickly changed the subject and later pulled me aside to ask that I not discuss financial matters with extended family. She explained that everyone's situation was different and that it wasn't appropriate to compare the support that she and Emma had received. The conversation felt strange, as if I was being asked to hide something shameful about my own hard work and independence. The real revelation came 6 months later, during a family dinner where Emma was discussing her decision to close the boutique. She was stressed about repaying the loan and worried about the impact on Dad's credit score. During this conversation, she made a casual comment that stopped me cold. She mentioned being grateful for the financial help she had received over the years, not just for the business, but for graduate school, her wedding, and the down payment on her house. I sat there processing this information, realizing that my sister had received financial support that I had never known about. When I asked for clarification, the room became uncomfortably quiet. It became clear that my parents had been providing Emma with substantial financial assistance for years, covering expenses that I had never even thought to ask about because I assumed they were beyond our family's means. The full scope of their financial support for Emma was staggering. They had paid for her master's degree in full, contributed $20,000 toward her wedding, and provided the down payment for her first home. They had covered her car payments, health insurance, and even routine expenses like groceries and utilities during difficult periods. The total amount of support over the years easily exceeded $100,000. When I asked why I had never been offered similar assistance, my mother's explanation was that I had always been so independent and capable that they assumed I didn't need help. She said they were proud of my self-reliance and didn't want to undermine my character by offering unnecessary support. The circular logic was infuriating. I was self-reliant because I had no choice, and because I appeared self-reliant, they felt justified in withholding support. The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult of my life. I explained how their differential treatment had affected my educational experience, my career preparation, and my sense of value within our family. I described the stress of working multiple jobs while trying to maintain academic excellence, the shame of not being able to afford basic supplies, and the isolation of feeling like I couldn't ask for help when I desperately needed it. My father's response was defensive. He argued that they had made decisions based on each daughter's individual needs and circumstances. He insisted that Emma required more support because she was less naturally capable, while I had always been able to handle challenges independently. He seemed genuinely confused by my emotional response, as if my success should have made me grateful for their lack of support rather than resentful. The most hurtful part of the conversation was realizing that my parents had fundamentally misunderstood what support means. They had confused enabling Emma's dependency with helping her succeed, while interpreting my resilience as evidence that I didn't need their care. They had created a system where the daughter who struggled received unlimited resources, while the daughter who excelled was left to manage alone. What made the situation even more painful was discovering that extended family members had been aware of the disparity all along. My aunt later admitted that she had questioned my parents' approach years earlier, but had been told that it was none of her business. Other relatives had noticed the differences, but had assumed there were factors they didn't understand. The aftermath of this revelation was complicated. I felt angry, hurt, and vindicated all at once. My success, despite their lack of support, proved that I had been capable of achieving my goals all along, but it also highlighted how much easier my journey could have been with even minimal assistance. I began to understand that their treatment of me wasn't about money, it was about their fundamental beliefs about my worth and my place in their family hierarchy. I decided to seek counseling to process these emotions and develop a healthy response to the situation. My therapist helped me understand that my parents' behavior reflected their own issues with fairness, control, and emotional availability. She explained that many families create informal hierarchies where some members are expected to be self-sufficient while others are allowed to remain dependent. The therapeutic work was revelatory. I realized that my parents' treatment of me had been a form of emotional neglect disguised as character building. They had withheld support not because they believed in my capabilities, but because they were more comfortable with Emma's emotional neediness than with my competence. My success threatened their narrative about which daughter required their attention and resources. Armed with this understanding, I began setting boundaries with my family. I stopped attending gatherings where financial matters were discussed, declined to provide advice or support for Emma's ongoing business struggles, and made it clear that I would not pretend their differential treatment had been fair or appropriate. I also started being more open with extended family about my experiences, refusing to protect my parents' reputation at the expense of my own truth. The consequences of these boundary changes were immediate and revealing. My parents initially responded with guilt-tripping and manipulation, suggesting that I was being ungrateful and selfish. They argued that family members should support each other without keeping score, conveniently forgetting that they had been keeping very detailed scores all along. When I didn't respond to their emotional manipulation, they became angry and accused me of destroying family harmony. Emma's reaction was particularly interesting. She seemed genuinely surprised by my feelings, as if she had never considered that our different treatment might have been unfair. She expressed some guilt about the support she had received, but ultimately defended our parents' decisions by arguing that everyone's needs were different. She seemed unable to understand that the issue wasn't about the money itself, but about the message that their choices had communicated about our relative worth. The turning point came when I received a significant professional recognition. I was selected as the Young Nurse of the Year by our state's nursing association, an honor that came with a $5,000 award and significant media coverage. The recognition was based on my clinical excellence, research contributions, and advocacy for pediatric cancer patients. It was validation that my career choices and work ethic had been correct all along. When the local newspaper published an article about my achievement, it included details about my background, including the fact that I had worked multiple jobs throughout nursing school and had completed my education with minimal family support. The article portrayed this as evidence of my determination and character, but anyone who knew our family would understand the fuller context. The article's publication created an uncomfortable situation for my parents. Friends and colleagues began congratulating them on raising such a successful daughter, while also commenting on my impressive independence and work ethic. Several people made remarks about how proud they must be of my achievements despite the challenges I had faced. The public recognition forced them to confront the reality that their treatment of me had been noticed and judged by others. My father's response to the article was telling. He called me to express pride in my achievements, but also to ask that I be more careful about how I discussed my educational experiences in public. He was concerned that people might get the wrong impression about our family's financial situation or their parenting choices. Once again, I was being asked to protect their reputation rather than being supported in my moment of recognition. This request crystallized everything I had learned about my family dynamics. They were proud of my success when it reflected well on them, but uncomfortable with the aspects of my story that revealed their own shortcomings. They wanted to claim credit for my achievements while distancing themselves from the struggles that had shaped my character. I declined to modify my public statements about my educational experience. I explained that my story was my own to tell, and that I would continue to be honest about the challenges I had faced and overcome. I also made it clear that their discomfort with public scrutiny was not my responsibility to manage. The months following this confrontation were difficult, but ultimately liberating. My parents continued to pressure me to reconcile and resume normal family relationships, but I maintained my boundaries. I attended major family events but declined to participate in discussions about finances, career advice, or family decision-making. I was polite but distant, treating them more like acquaintances than intimate family members. During this period, I also began speaking publicly about educational equity and the importance of family support for academic success. I was invited to present at conferences about nursing education and student resilience, and I was always honest about the role that financial stress had played in my educational journey. These presentations were well received and led to opportunities for consulting and writing about student success strategies. My professional life continued to flourish. I was promoted to charge nurse in the pediatric oncology unit, completed my master's degree in nursing administration, and was accepted into a doctoral program with full funding. I also began dating someone who appreciated my work ethic and independence, and who couldn't understand why my family had been so unsupportive during my educational journey. The contrast between my professional recognition and my family's treatment became more apparent as time passed. Colleagues respected my expertise and sought my input on important decisions. I was invited to join committees, present at national conferences, and contribute to professional publications. Meanwhile, my parents continued to treat me as if my opinions and experiences were less valuable than Emma's. The final confrontation came during Emma's birthday dinner, nearly 2 years after the initial revelation about their financial support. The gathering was at my parents' house, and Emma was discussing her plans to return to school for yet another degree program. She was considering several options, including law school and a master's program in business administration, and was asking for our parents' advice about which path to pursue. During this conversation, my mother made a comment about how important it was to follow your dreams, regardless of practical considerations. She encouraged Emma to choose the program that most inspired her, assuring her that they would find a way to make it work financially. The irony was overwhelming, given that I had been told repeatedly to make practical choices and manage my own expenses. I found myself speaking up in a way that surprised everyone, including myself. I calmly noted that it was interesting how the advice and support offered to Emma differed from what I had received during my educational journey. I mentioned specific examples of requests I had made that had been denied, contrasting them with the ongoing support Emma continued to receive. The room became completely silent. My parents looked shocked that I had brought up these issues in front of Emma and other family members. Emma appeared uncomfortable, as if she was finally understanding the full scope of the differential treatment. Other relatives looked confused, as if they were processing information they had suspected but never had confirmed. My father's response was anger. He accused me of being bitter and ungrateful, suggesting that I was trying to ruin Emma's special day with my negativity. He argued that their parenting decisions were not up for public debate, and that I was being inappropriate by discussing family finances in front of others. His reaction confirmed that he still didn't understand the fundamental unfairness of their treatment. My mother's response was more emotional. She began crying and talking about how hard it had been to balance the needs of two very different daughters. She insisted that they had always loved us equally and had made decisions based on what they thought was best for each of us individually. She seemed genuinely distressed that I had interpreted their actions as favoritism rather than individualized support. What struck me most about their reactions was the complete absence of accountability. Neither parent acknowledged that their decisions had been hurtful or unfair. They seemed to believe that their intentions had been good, and that should be sufficient to excuse the impact of their actions. They showed no curiosity about how their treatment had affected me, or recognition that they might have made mistakes. The dinner ended awkwardly, with most family members leaving early and avoiding eye contact. I felt both relieved and sad. I had finally spoken my truth in front of witnesses, but I had also acknowledged that my parents were incapable of the kind of self-reflection that would be necessary for genuine reconciliation. In the weeks that followed, I received several calls from family members who wanted to discuss what had happened. Some were supportive and acknowledged that they had noticed the differential treatment over the years. Others were critical and suggested that I should have handled my concerns more privately. The range of reactions helped me understand that our family dysfunction had been visible to others, even if it had never been directly addressed. My aunt, who had always been perceptive about family dynamics, was particularly supportive. She admitted that she had been concerned about my parents' treatment of me for years, but had felt it wasn't her place to intervene. She validated my feelings and encouraged me to continue maintaining boundaries that protected my emotional well-being. Emma's response was the most complex. She called me several days after the dinner and acknowledged that she was beginning to understand how differently we had been treated. She expressed guilt about the support she had received and offered to help me financially if I ever needed it. While I appreciated her gesture, I explained that the issue wasn't about current financial need, but about the message that their differential treatment had communicated about our relative worth. She seemed to struggle with this concept, repeatedly returning to the idea that everyone's needs were different and that our parents had done their best. I realized that accepting the full truth about our family's favoritism would require her to confront uncomfortable realities about her own dependence and the unfairness of her advantages. It was easier for her to maintain the narrative that our different treatment had been justified by our different personalities and needs. My parents' response was predictable but still disappointing. They continued to pressure me to apologize for disrupting family harmony and to resume normal relationships. They seemed to believe that time would heal the rift without requiring any acknowledgement of their role in creating it. They wanted forgiveness without accountability, reconciliation without change. I made a decision that felt both difficult and liberating. I would maintain minimal contact with my parents, attending only major family events and keeping interactions superficial. I would not pretend that their treatment had been fair, but I would not continue to seek their acknowledgement or approval. I would focus my energy on building healthy relationships with people who valued and respected me. This decision was supported by my therapist, who helped me understand that I couldn't control my parents' responses, but could control my own boundaries. She explained that seeking validation from people who had consistently invalidated me was a form of self-harm. She encouraged me to find validation from my achievements, my relationships, and my contributions to others. The process of emotional detachment was gradual but transformative. I stopped hoping that my parents would suddenly understand or acknowledge their mistakes. I stopped feeling responsible for protecting their feelings or reputation. I began to see them as flawed individuals whose limitations had shaped my childhood but didn't have to define my future. Professional recognition continued to validate my choices and efforts. I was invited to join the editorial board of a prestigious nursing journal, received a research grant to study family dynamics in pediatric healthcare, and was promoted to a leadership position in my hospital's quality improvement program. Each achievement reinforced my confidence in my capabilities and my right to be proud of my accomplishments. I also began sharing my story more openly, both in professional settings and in personal relationships. I discovered that many people had experienced similar family dynamics, where one child was expected to be self-sufficient while siblings received ongoing support. These conversations were healing and helped me understand that my family's dysfunction wasn't unique or insurmountable. The most unexpected outcome of this journey was how it improved my ability to help others. My experience with family favoritism and financial manipulation gave me insights that were valuable in my work with pediatric patients and their families. I could recognize signs of family dysfunction that might affect a child's treatment compliance or emotional well-being. I could advocate for families who were struggling with resource allocation and communication issues. I also began mentoring nursing students who were facing financial challenges similar to those I had experienced. I helped them identify scholarship opportunities, navigate financial aid systems, and develop strategies for managing school-related expenses. These relationships were incredibly rewarding and helped me transform my painful experiences into something constructive. 2 years after the confrontation at Emma's birthday dinner, I received an unexpected call from my father. Emma's latest business venture had failed, and she was facing significant financial difficulties. She had defaulted on several loans, including the original $40,000 business loan that he had co-signed. His credit score had been damaged, and he was being held responsible for her debts. He was calling to ask if I could help them financially. He explained that Emma was considering bankruptcy, which would leave him responsible for the full amount of her business loan. He mentioned that he knew I was doing well professionally and wondered if I might be able to lend them money to help resolve the situation. The irony of this request was not lost on me. The same man who had refused to help me with $1,200 for textbooks was now asking me to help him with tens of thousands of dollars in debt that he had voluntarily assumed for my sister. The request felt like a vindication of everything I had tried to explain about their financial priorities and decision-making. My response was measured but firm. I explained that I would not be able to help them financially, not because I lacked the resources, but because doing so would enable the same patterns of financial irresponsibility that had created the problem. I pointed out that their request perfectly illustrated the differential treatment I had experienced throughout my life. I also noted that if they had supported my education with even a fraction of the resources they had provided to Emma, I might have graduated with less debt and been in a better position to help family members in crisis. Their past financial decisions had consequences that extended beyond their immediate impact on Emma's lifestyle. My father's response was predictable. He accused me of being selfish and vindictive, suggesting that I was letting family loyalty be compromised by old grievances. He argued that Emma's situation was an emergency that required immediate family support, regardless of past disagreements. He seemed unable to understand that his request was actually proof of everything I had been trying to tell him about their favoritism. I remained calm during this conversation, but I was also clear about my boundaries. I explained that I had learned to make financial decisions based on practical considerations and long-term consequences, skills that I had developed because they had required me to be financially independent. I would not abandon those principles to enable poor decision-making, even by family members. The conversation ended with him hanging up in frustration. I felt sad about the deterioration of our relationship, but I also felt proud of my ability to maintain my boundaries under pressure. I had not allowed guilt or manipulation to override my better judgment, and I had responded to their crisis with the same practical approach they had required me to use throughout my educational journey. In the months that followed, I learned through other family members that my parents had been forced to liquidate some of their retirement savings to cover Emma's debts. They had also taken out a second mortgage on their house to manage the financial crisis. Emma had declared bankruptcy, which had indeed left them responsible for the business loan they had co-signed. These developments were a stark reminder of the long-term consequences of their financial favoritism. Their decision to enable Emma's financial dependence had ultimately threatened their own financial security. Meanwhile, their requirement that I be financially independent had prepared me for a stable and successful future. I felt no satisfaction in their financial difficulties, but I also felt no guilt about my decision not to help them. I had learned through therapy that taking responsibility for problems I hadn't created was a form of codependency that would ultimately harm everyone involved. My parents needed to experience the consequences of their choices in order to learn from them. The situation also clarified my understanding of family loyalty. True loyalty involves supporting family members in making good decisions and holding them accountable for poor ones. It doesn't mean enabling destructive behavior or protecting people from the consequences of their actions. I had been more loyal to my family's long-term well-being by refusing to enable their dysfunction than I would have been by providing financial rescue. Today, my relationship with my parents remains distant but cordial. They have never acknowledged that their treatment of Emma and me was unfair, and I have stopped expecting them to do so. We attend family gatherings and maintain superficial conversations, but we don't discuss finances, career decisions, or family dynamics. I have accepted that this is the relationship we will have. My relationship with Emma has evolved in a different direction. She has begun to understand the impact of our differential treatment and has expressed genuine remorse about the advantages she received. She has also started taking more responsibility for her financial decisions and has stopped asking our parents for support. While our relationship isn't as close as it once was, I respect her efforts to change and grow. The most important outcome of this journey has been my understanding of my own worth and capabilities. I no longer seek validation from people who have consistently failed to provide it. I have learned to celebrate my achievements without needing external approval, and I have developed relationships with people who appreciate my character and contributions. I have also learned that success despite obstacles is more meaningful than success with unlimited support. My struggles made me more resilient, more empathetic, and more determined. I am grateful for my capabilities and proud of what I have accomplished, regardless of whether my family acknowledges these achievements. My career continues to flourish, and I have found deep satisfaction in my work with pediatric cancer patients and their families. I have completed my doctoral degree and am now conducting research that contributes to improved patient outcomes. I have also continued mentoring students and speaking publicly about educational equity and family support. The financial security that I have achieved through my own efforts feels more valuable than any inherited wealth could have been. I know that my success is the result of my own choices and efforts, and that gives me confidence in my ability to handle whatever challenges the future might bring. If you're watching this video because you've experienced similar family favoritism or financial manipulation, I want you to know that you're not alone. Many families create informal hierarchies where some members are expected to be self-sufficient, while others are allowed to remain dependent. This differential treatment can be incredibly painful, but it doesn't define your worth or limit your potential. The most important thing I've learned is that seeking validation from people who have consistently failed to provide it is a form of self-harm. Your worth doesn't depend on your family's recognition or approval. You have the right to be proud of your achievements, regardless of whether they acknowledge them. I've also learned that success despite obstacles is more meaningful than success with unlimited support. The challenges you face may seem unfair, but they are also developing skills and resilience that will serve you throughout your life. Your struggles are not evidence of your inadequacy, they are proof of your strength. Setting boundaries with family members who have treated you unfairly is not selfish or vindictive. It's necessary for your emotional well-being and personal growth. You cannot control their responses to your boundaries, but you can control your own reactions to their behavior. Remember that family loyalty doesn't mean enabling destructive behavior or protecting people from the consequences of their actions. True loyalty involves supporting family members in making good decisions and holding them accountable for poor ones. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable dysfunction. Finally, I want to encourage you to find validation from your achievements, your relationships, and your contributions to others. Build relationships with people who appreciate your character and capabilities. Seek out mentors and colleagues who recognize your potential. Create a chosen family of people who support your growth and success. Your story doesn't end with your family's limitations. You have the power to create a different narrative, one where your worth is recognized and your achievements are celebrated. You deserve relationships that support your growth and success, and you have the right to expect more from the people in your life. I hope sharing my story has been helpful to those of you who have experienced similar challenges. Remember that you are not alone, and that your experiences have value. Your resilience is inspiring, and your success is meaningful, regardless of who acknowledges it. Thank you for watching, and I'd love to hear about your own experiences with family dynamics and financial favoritism in the comments below. If this video resonated with you, please consider liking and subscribing to support more content about family relationships, personal growth, and finding strength in difficult circumstances.